Yeah. So today I want to talk about the rehabilitative efforts and failures in youth authority. So I'm just gonna go over some of the, briefly go over some of the classes and shit that they offered to try to rehabilitate us, and why I don't think they worked. Now the first one that they try to push everybody has to take is victims class, and it's actually pretty interesting because you learn a lot of things and shit. Um, at least I did, like, cause I really paid attention. I've always been like interested in like the human psyche and shit. So that was something that I tripped out on, especially when they started talking about like like child abuse and shit like that. And you know, I'm not gonna say like fucking go into all kinds of crazy shit, but let's just say like when I was a kid, like my mom used to whoop my ass a lot, like a lot. You know what I mean? On the verge of like fucking, some people now it was back in the '80s and shit, but now they call it like child abuse and shit. And fucking one thing that they said that I found real interesting is that a child will tolerate that abuse 23 hours a day just so they can get that 1 hour of like love and affection and shit. And I was like, oh shit, that shit was kind of like, tripped me the fuck out. So you had a victims class where they did that. They would bring fucking victims of like violent crimes, murders and shit like that. Well, not family members of the victims and shit. And they'd come in and just talk about how their life has changed since. And I remember how stupid I was, right? Because they try to say like how life has changed. There was a one couple talking about how life has changed since their son was murdered and shit, and he was murdered in a drive-by, and how things will never be the same for them. And I try to justify and say, well, not justify, but like I don't even know what the fuck I was trying to do. Really, tell you the truth, but I just kind of try to comfort them in knowing that drive-bys have been banned. You know what I mean, on the streets now. Like people don't really do drive-bys anymore. So I try to comfort them with that, but they didn't give a fuck. They didn't want to hear that shit. You know what I mean? And like my stupid ass, I thought like, oh yeah, like don't worry, we got this under control now. Like it was just dumb as shit. You know what I mean? But that's how I was back then. Like I couldn't separate other people's realities from the streets. Like for me, that's all I knew. You know what I mean? So I always wanted people to see things from my perspective and get them like to understand that there have been changes and shit, right? So you had that, and at the end of victims class, they'll have like your parents come or your loved ones and shit, and they'll do like this big old demonstration and basically saying you end up dead or remain in jail for the rest of your life if you don't straighten up and shit. Well, they had that. Another class we got to take is like gang class and shit, and that list that was ran by Newman, Dave Newman and shit, and he said one thing too that actually, because I don't remember a lot of what they were saying, because a lot of it was like one ear, you mean in one ear, out the other. Like I was like, whatever, man. But he said one thing too that was kind of like, uh, kind of tripped me out too. Where I was like, oh shit, I can see that viewpoint. He was like, what would you do if somebody came and slapped your mom in the face? And everybody's like, man, I'll take flight on that motherfucker. You know what I mean? He's like, well, why don't you guys take flight on yourselves? Because every time you go to jail, every time you don't listen to her, it's like slapping her in the face. This isn't what she wants for you. So I kind of seen that. I was like, all right, I could kind of understand that shit. You know what I mean? So he had a point there. They had parenting classes. I don't even know why the fuck they put me in parenting classes. They asked me if I wanted kids one day. I said, yeah, eventually I guess I want kids. Because I didn't have any kids when I went to YA and shit. And because maybe I wanted kids, they put me in a fucking parenting class. I don't remember any of that shit, to tell you the truth. They have drug classes, basically like a drug class, like a course, like to understand like fucking, you know, rehabilitation and shit. And then they have actual like cottages and shit, drug cottages, where they go more in depth into that shit and they fucking like test you and all that shit. I got lucky because when I was in Silmore, there was a guy who was going back to YA. He was a violator and shit. No, he wasn't a violator. He caught a new charge. He had maxed out a YA, caught a new charge, and he was going back to YA. And he had told me, whatever you do, don't say you do drugs. They'll put you in a fucking drug cottage, and it's fucked up. So I got lucky. They were like, you do drugs? I was like, nah. So I got lucky with that shit. But yeah, they'll test you and shit. Like that shit is all fucking bad. What's crazy is that's where most of the drugs were and shit that I seen. Like they were mainly in Kennedy and fucking Kennedy and what was the other one? Madison. That's what most of them were and shit. Cause when I was in Hayes, you get a little high and shit. Like not really though. And when I was in fucking Monroe, we got high every now and then. Like I didn't get high at all my whole time in Nellis. But like homies got high and shit, but like not like that. But like fuck you know like they were fucking getting high as fucking Kennedy and Madison and shit. And yeah, so fucking you had those shits, and then and I know in YTS and then and fucking and in Nellis they had sex offender programs. So in Nellis you had way out there next to fucking Nixon, they had fucking what the fuck was it Carter, yeah Carter, where they had a sex offender program and shit. And I don't know what the fuck they went over there. But like you had sex offenders and shit over there, separated from the rest of us all the way over there. And in YTS, the same thing. You had I and J, where you had all the sex offenders right there and shit next to the Rock, next to lockup. Both of them coincidentally were like next to lockup and shit. And so I guess they try to rehabilitate them and try to fucking get to the bottom of what they were doing and shit. So I don't really know too much about what was going on over there. But yeah, so basically that's the main ones that I remember is like the fucking the main ones though were like the victims class and the gang class and shit. And one of the reasons why I think they didn't work is because they try to. This is the main thing I'll always say too. They try to get you to understand and empathize with your victims and with people who could potentially be victims or people who could, you know, or families of the victims and shit like that, right? But the thing is this, when you go to YA, it's hard to have any kind of empathy because your whole life you grew up without anything. You grew up like angry and no one has ever had empathy towards you. And that's the way I kind of looked at it. It's like nobody gives a fuck about me. You know what I mean? So like, why am I gonna start giving a fuck about people all of a sudden? All of a sudden, I'm gonna be all emotional, like, oh, poor people, like, fuck that shit. I'm a motherfucking gangster, like, whatever. You know what I mean? That was my mentality back then. Of course, things have changed now. Now I do have empathy for both sides. I have empathy for motherfuckers on the streets. Like I know what they're going through. I know how difficult it is, how hard it is. You know what I mean? And how much pain is and anger is in a lot of those youngsters. You know what I mean? I understand that shit because I've been there. But at the same time, I understand the people that they're victimizing. That you know, everybody has a right to walk around and want to be safe. You know what I mean? Like everybody should have that expectation. However, there are motherfuckers out there that just don't give a fuck. You know what I mean? And it's fucked up because like there are situations that have that are hardened people. There's situations that have made them that way. And I'm not excusing their actions. Like you should never go out there and victimize people and shit. But I could understand that pain and that anger that leads to that. You know what I mean? So it's a trip. And part of the reasons why I think the rehabilitation didn't work is because they had that pain, they had that anger, and that was never addressed. That was hardly ever addressed, and you don't want to talk about that shit. So one of the main things I think they fucked up with the Youth Authority is putting all kinds of fucking gangbangers in the same area. Like you should have made that shit smaller. Like instead of 70 people to a dorm, like even a dorm, that shit should have been like rooms. You know what I mean? Like you should have had fucking like remind them that they're kids, because that's one thing that I'll keep saying over and over. That's one thing that we always forgot in there, is that we were kids. We fooled ourselves into believing that we were men. We fooled ourselves into believing that we got this shit under control. And we, instead of embracing the rehabilitation efforts, we embraced the being locked up part. We embraced the gangster parts that came with it. That's what we embraced. So it's like, yeah, we're ready for that next level. We're ready to hit the county jails. We're ready to hit the joint. Like this is it. Like we got this shit down. Like it's no big deal. I got lucky again. I never even been at the county. I never been at the joint like that. Once I got out of YA, you know, I fucking ran from the cops for a few months. My girl got pregnant, and I calmed down. I got lucky. You know what I mean? Like fucking, I didn't have to worry about all that shit. But a lot of homies, most homies in YA, I think they said it was like a 90% recidivism rate. Like that's fucking ridiculous. Like those classes didn't work for them either. So I know for a fact those classes didn't really have much of an impact on me, and I know they didn't have an impact on most of the other wards, because like I said, 90% recidivism rate is fucking ridiculous. But yeah, it's like that we had those things going against us. We didn't embrace those you know, that empathy. We didn't embrace wanting to better ourselves, because we didn't know how. All we knew was this is our life, and we got used to it. We got a lot of homies became institutionalized. Like you spent a big chunk of your teenage adolescent years in there. Like that's gonna mold you. So it molded people to becoming gangsters and fucking convicts and inmates and shit. Like that's what they were looking forward to. No one was looking forward to getting out and making an impact on the lives of victims or any of that shit. So it was just a fucked up thing. I think those good intentioned programs, but they were never gonna work. You know, you needed smaller class, you needed smaller samples, like not samples. You needed smaller groups of people living together, and then you needed to specialize in what they were going through. Like if they had child abuse or any of that shit growing up, like you needed to specialize in that shit and separate them and get them to kind of get them away from that shit. Because you gotta remember why you have a gang of people like me. I had a gang of homies. I'm from Monte-Flores and shit, so I had a gang of homies from Monte-Flores there. And it was just like, oh shit, what's up? My boys are here. You know what I mean? And like, I'm the kind of person that I don't go out there looking for trouble and shit. But when violence happens, like I would get excited, you know, like, oh hell yeah, it's gonna fucking crack. Like I'm ready. Like that shit would just pump me up. I don't know why. Like even when I see people like getting down or like that shit would just get me like excited where I wanted to be part of that shit. Yeah, even then, like they should have really addressed that shit with me. Like, hey, what the fuck is making this guy so fucking, prone to violence and shit? They should do that with all of us, because there wasn't just me. There was everybody there was prone to violence. You know what I mean? So what was it that was making us violent? What was it that's making us outbursts, like all those outbursts? And what was really bothering us? And I don't think they really got to that. They kind of went by the book to try to fix it when they should have dealt with it individually. And yeah, that's those are my thoughts on it. And I'm glad that, like I said, I always say it over and over, I'm glad that system is done, because it was a failure of a system. 90% recidivism rate is a fucking joke. I'm out. Peace.